So we've been talking about quadratics and just kind of reviewing what quadratics are. First of all, anything that is a quadratic, remember when we graph it, is going to be a U-shape. And that U-shape is called a parabola. So again, just kind of reviewing some stuff. And over the past couple weeks, most importantly, we have been talking about our socks. We spent a lot of time talking about our socks. And our socks are a couple things. They are our solutions, our zeros, and our x-intercepts, and they are all points on the x-axis. So our solutions, our zeros, and our x-intercepts are all our points on our x-axis. So we're going to continue to work through those today. We're going to find another way to find our socks. So far, we've learned how to graph and find them. So one of the things we've done so far is we've learned how to graph and find them. We have also learned most recently how to factor and then find our solution zeros, our x-intercepts from that, or our socks from that. Today we're going to use what's called the quadratic formula. So the quadratic formula is going to look super complicated. It's x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And I realize that formula looks like, oh my gosh, that's so much work, that looks ridiculous. I get that, but here's what you need to know. That it's like any other formula. You just have to know what a is, what b is, and what c is. And a, b, and c all come from our standard form. A is the number in front of x squared. B is the number in front of x, and c is the number that's by itself. So as long as you know a, b, and c, all you're doing is you're plugging those numbers in. Now, I do want to point out something here. So at the very beginning, it says negative b. Whenever it says negative b, or anytime when you have that minus sign in a formula, that really means the opposite of b. When we see negative b, that means the opposite of b. So if b is positive, when we put it in the formula, it's negative. If b is negative, when we put it in the formula, it is positive. So we're going to use this, and we're going to work out problem number 1. So problem number 1 says 3x squared plus 19x plus 15. First thing we're looking for is what is a, and then what is b, and what is c. So remember, a is the number in front of x squared, so a is going to be 3 in this case. B is the number in front of x, so b is going to be 19. And then c is the number on the end by itself down here without a variable attached to it, which in our problem is 15, so c is going to be 15. Now, what I do want to point out, something else I want to remind you of, and this is true last week, is that all of our equations have to equal 0. So in order for us to do this, they have to equal 0, which worked out well for this problem that we are currently working on. It equaled 0. But if you look at problem 2, it doesn't equal 0 right now. It equals negative 1. So that means we're going to have to do some manipulation there to make it equal to 0. So now that we have our a, b, and c, we are going to plug them into our quadratic formula. So I've got the quadratic formula here. So the first part says negative b, which means the opposite of b. B is currently 19, so when we plug it in, it's going to be negative 19 plus or minus the square root. So let's talk about this plus minus symbol, because this is a new thing. This is something you in Algebra 1 have never seen before. Okay, so when we have this plus minus symbol, this means two things. And those two things are that our formula isn't really one formula. Our formula is actually two formulas. The first formula is negative b plus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, all divided by 2a. And our second formula is negative b minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, all over 2a. And if you look at these formulas, you notice that the only thing that's different about them, literally the only thing that's different, is that one of them has a plus sign and one of them has a minus sign. That's it. So as math people, we like to be efficient. We don't like to waste time. So there's no reason for us to write all of this information twice if the only thing that changes is one time it's plus, one time it's minus. So that is where we came up with this plus minus symbol that shows up in our problem. It just means that we're going to do this problem twice. We're just going to add one time and we're going to subtract another time. So continuing on with our problem that we have here. So we have this plus or minus the square root of, it says b squared, so that's going to be 19 squared, minus 4 times a, well, a in our problem was 3, times c, and c in our problem was 15, all divided by 2 times a, and a again was 3. So yes, this formula looks really complicated, but literally all we're doing is we're just plugging in numbers, and that's what we've done. And the color coding will help. We're going to do problem 2 a little bit differently. I have another page I'm going to give you guys that, or I've given you, that will help as well, just kind of keeping it all organized. So when we go to simplify this, because this looks rough, like we've got a lot of addition and subtraction, we've got some multiplication in there, we have some exponents, so we need to make this look a little bit better. So in order to make that happen, the very first thing that we talk about, the very first piece that we're going to work with, is we're going to work with this part that is inside the square root symbol. This part inside the square root symbol has a really unique name, and it is the discriminant. So it kind of sounds like my name. So it's discriminant. So this part, the discriminant in here, we're going to plug this in the calculator first. We do that part first. So I'm still going to have negative 19. I'm still going to have plus or minus the square root. I'm still going to have a fraction. I'm still going to have something in my denominator. We'll get to that in a second. But the very first thing we want to do is we want to take this part here and we want to plug that in the calculator and see what it gives us. 19 squared minus 4 times 3 times 15. Now notice I did not highlight the square root symbol. I just highlighted the part underneath it. So when we type this in, we're not putting the square root symbol in there. We're just putting all the numbers in. And when you type that in, it should give you 181. So all this part underneath the square root really worked out to be 181. So my discriminant is 181. And then the denominator, well, that's kind of easy. We have 2 times 3. 2 times 3 is really 6. So we're just going to say 6 for the denominator. So essentially, this is our answer. We got to see if we can do a little bit more to it, but that really is what our answer is going to end up being, which is actually 2 answers if you remember what we talked about a few minutes ago. But this is really what our answer is going to look like. So the next thing we need to figure out is is there a square root of 181? Like if I put square root of 181 in the calculator, is that something pretty or is that something ugly? If you type it in, you're going to get 13.45362405. And it keeps going. I'm sure that's not it. So if you type in square root of 18, square root of 181, just this part here, the square root of 181, you're going to get something ugly. If it's ugly, it needs to stay inside. It does not need to come out. If it is ugly, it stays inside. So really, I can write my answer as 2 answers. My first answer would be negative 19 plus the square root of 181 divided by 6. And my second answer would be negative 19 minus the square root of 181 divided by 6. Because remember we said this plus minus symbol meant that we had 2 answers, that one time we added and one time we subtracted. But other than that, everything is exactly the same. So these are my 2 answers. And you're like, well, what did we just find? Well, that's kind of easy, because we just found our socks. We found our x-intercepts. We found our solutions. We found our zeros of our function. We found these points on the x-axis. So if you were to type this in the calculator, negative 19 plus 181 divided by 6, it's going to give you a number. Same thing here. It's going to give you a number. And if you were to graph your function and go look at the graph, you're going to see that they really do cross. This is going to cross at the same point as these two numbers. So I wanted to show you that they really do give you the same thing. So if you'll notice over here, I typed in negative 19 plus the square root of 181 over 6, and I typed in negative 19 minus the square root of 181 over 6. So I took the two numbers we'd gotten on the previous page, different things, but plus sign one time, minus sign the other time. That's it. The only difference between these problems is that one's plus, one's minus. And for the first one, we got an answer of negative 0.9243. And if you look at your x-intercepts, this first x-intercept right here is negative 0.924. They're the same thing. They're literally the exact same thing. And if we look at our second x-intercept, or our second answer that we got negative 5.408. Well, the second x-intercept here is negative 5.409. The reason it's different is because this one rounded. This 9 here told the 8 to round up. Remember, 5 or more, raise the score, 4 or less, let it rest. So this 9 tells this 8 to go up to a 9. So this quadratic formula, this big massive thing that we just used, all it's doing is it's telling us where our graph crosses the x-axis. That's literally all it is doing. So for problem 2, I'm going to give you the, we're going to do the exact same thing, except instead of using this formula here, I've rewritten this formula using shapes. So instead of letters, I just have shapes. It works out the same way. Promise it's going to do the exact same math. Nothing tricky. But before we can do anything in this problem, we mentioned this earlier, that our problem needed to equal 0, not negative 1. So the very first thing we need to do is we need to move this negative 1 over. When we move that negative 1 over, it is going to become a positive 1. So we'll end up with 4x squared plus 4x plus 1 equals 0. So I'm going to take these numbers here, and I'm going to plug them into this formula where I have the shapes. So it says 4x squared, so that means for the square I'm going to put a 4, plus 4x, so for the circle I'm going to put a 4, plus 1, so for the triangle I'm going to put a 1, and I'm just going to go and plug all those numbers into my shapes down here. So my circles are both going to be 4s, my rectangles are going to be 4s, and my triangle is going to be 1. So at this point, I have my formula already set up and ready to go. So now all we have to do is figure out what our discriminant is. So remember, the discriminant is the part underneath the square root symbol. So the 4 squared minus 4 times 1 times, or 4 times 4 times 1. So we're going to plug that in the calculator. So we have negative 4 plus or minus the square root. When you type all that in, 4 squared minus 4 times 1, that's going to give you 0. So we're going to get 0 for our discriminant. Divided by, let's do some math, 2 times 4 is going to give us 8 for the denominator. So our problem looks okay. Negative 4 plus or minus 0, the square root of 0 divided by 8. Well, let's figure out now what is the square root of 0. If you type that in the calculator, is it pretty or ugly? It's really the question you keep asking yourselves, is this pretty or is it not pretty? So square root of 0 is 0. That's pretty, so that means that she can come out of the house. So negative 4 plus or minus 0 divided by 8 is really my problem. And that actually is two problems. The first one is that is negative 4 plus 0 divided by 8. And the second one is it is negative 4 minus 0 divided by 8. And we need to do a little bit of math because notice that this problem ended up different than the last one. The reason it ended up different is because there's no square root symbols there. It's just all numbers. We can work with numbers, and you can plug that in the calculator if you want to plug that in the calculator, or you can just do the math. If we do the math, on top we have negative 4 plus 0, which is negative 4 divided by 8. And negative 4 divided by 8 is negative 1/2. So there is one of my answers. So then we're going to do the math on the other one. Well, we have negative 4 minus 0. That is also negative 4. And then I still have divided by 8. And negative 4 divided by 8 is also negative 1/2. So I have my second answer, but notice that our answers are actually the same. So that's okay. We just means we have two answers that are both negative 1/2. That's totally fine. So my main goal for you for this first part of this assignment is just to get, if nothing else, to get to this point where you figured out what the discriminant was, you have your formula worked out, and it's something nice and sweet and small, okay? This is the first goal, is can you get here? So the assignment for 12.5, you only had to do the front side. Oh, there was only a front side, sorry. Problems 1 through 6, and I just want you to get to this part where you have the -4 plus or minus the square root of 0, because we got 0 because we plugged in everything here that was in purple. That part was our discriminant. So this part inside was our discriminant from up here. And that's the part we really want to focus on getting to, at least for the beginning part of this assignment. So tomorrow we'll do a little bit more in-depth look into this.